Welcome to part 4 in the Building Internal Developer Platforms ebook series. Today we're going to cover chapters 5 and 6. If you haven't watched the previous videos, go ahead and check those out. If you want to jump ahead or just read the ebook, it's in the description below. But today we're going to be covering empowering developers with vCluster, and then we're going to talk about advanced topics in managing virtual Kubernetes clusters. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to jump into the slides and check out what chapters 5 and 6 have for us. So we're going to start out with empowering developers with vCluster. This is chapter 5. We're going to have chapter 6 after this, and then we'll have a conclusion at the end of chapter 6. So we're going to cover providing developer autonomy, streamlining development workflows, enhancing collaboration and innovation, and then best practices for vCluster environments. So providing developer autonomy, self-service access. You got to give them self-service access. So you got to implement a self-service portal where developers can create and manage their own virtual clusters with predefined limits. Caveat, right? If you want your developers having access to Kubernetes clusters, you're going to want to set this up. If you're just doing things through GitHub and you've got all of it automated and everything, then they may not need access to the virtual clusters themselves, and they can actually kind of use the platform you've created. So access to DevOps tools. Ensure developers have access to integrated tools like Argo CD for development, Vault for secrets management, and Terraform for infrastructure provisioning. And then make sure you document the workflow, right? If they don't have documentation, sometimes if they do have documentation, they're going to run into issues, right? But you want to at least have it documented, so if they do run into issues, they have something that they can read to figure out how you meant for them to use it. And then you can help them out, in ticketing systems, or if they run into other issues, and then iterate on your documentation. Streamlining developer workflows. So continuous integration and continuous deployment. So you want to utilize something like Argo CD to automate deployments directly from source control, ensuring that the latest code versions are always deployed efficiently and reliably. And then secrets management. You want to use Vault to manage and inject secrets into applications without exposing them in source code or deployment scripts, enhancing security. I'm sure everyone's kind of run into that issue where, oh man, I've uploaded a secret or something to GitHub and I've got to delete everything, and it's a huge thing, right? So use something like Vault to manage secrets instead. Get used to not actually having any of your secret or sensitive information uploaded to GitHub. I'm sure you've already run into that before, and you're already making sure that doesn't happen. But sometimes they slip out. Making it so that it's harder for that to actually be included is a good thing to do from the beginning. And then infrastructure as code. So enable developers to define and manage their infrastructure using Terraform, which works seamlessly with vCluster. We've got documentation on how you can actually deploy with Terraform, which makes it super easy. Providing predictable and reproducible environments. Next, we're going to talk about enhancing collaboration and innovation. So integrated development environments encourage the use of cloud-based IDEs that connect directly to virtual clusters, allowing developers to code, test, and deploy within the same environment. So if they're using IDE and they can actually just connect to the virtual cluster, it's going to make it super easy for them to do development. And then it makes it a little bit faster to actually set up the environment and actually have access, something like DevPod. Version control systems. Ensure all code configurations and infrastructure definitions are stored in version control system, facilitating collaboration among team members and across teams. So that's going to be like GitHub and stuff like that. You're probably already using that if you have developers. If not, definitely use it, right? Best practices for vCluster environments. So you're going to want to use resource quotas and limits. So define and enforce resource quotas and limits for virtual clusters to prevent any single environment from consuming disproportionate resources. You don't want your virtual clusters to get way too big, or one user using basically the entire cluster, even though you've given them a virtual cluster. You want to define how much they can use so they don't grow too large. Also, it might help you with pricing and stuff like that if you've got chargeback for different groups or teams that you're actually supporting. Monitoring and logging. So implement comprehensive monitoring and logging to track the performance and health of virtual clusters and the applications running on them. And then security policies. So establish strict security policies and role-based access controls to manage who can do what within the virtual clusters. A lot of this is kind of repeating from previous information, but these are very important things you want to think about when you're building an IDP. So we're kind of reiterating them and then saying them in a different section. These are some of the best practices for what you want to do. Now let's go ahead and check out chapter 6, where we're going to be talking about advanced topics in managing virtual Kubernetes clusters. We're going to cover scaling virtual clusters, monitoring and observability, security considerations, and then best practices for maintenance and upgrades. And then we'll do a conclusion and talk about what's coming next in the next video. So scaling virtual clusters. There's 3 different types of scaling we're going to talk about: horizontal scaling, vertical scaling, and automated scaling. Horizontal scaling is going to expand the number of virtual clusters to distribute workloads more evenly and manage traffic spikes without affecting the performance of existing clusters. So vertical scaling is going to increase the resource allocated to specific virtual clusters that require more CPU, memory, or storage, especially for resource-intensive applications. And then automated scaling is going to implement automated scaling policies that dynamically adjust resources based on real-time usage metrics, ensuring optimal performance and resource utilization. So probably going to use each of these at different times. Horizontal scaling, you're going to have to actually scale out if you need more worker nodes. Vertical scaling is, I need a worker node that needs, more CPU or more memory. And then automated scaling is something you could use to actually scale up and scale down depending on how many workloads are running at any given time. And if you're using like the Pro or the platform of vCluster, what you can do is use sleep mode to kind of help with this to scale workloads down when they're not actually being used. Monitoring and observability. So logging, you're going to integrate comprehensive logging solutions that capture events and transactions within virtual clusters, allowing for detailed analysis and troubleshooting. And then metrics collection. So deploy monitoring tools such as Prometheus to collect metrics from virtual clusters. This data helps gauge the health and performance of the clusters and the applications running on them. And you're probably going to use these metrics to actually figure out what kind of quotas and different things you're going to use too, based on how much users are using, and then figure out like if you need to scale up or scale down based on that. And then dashboards and visualization. So you're going to use tools like Grafana to create dashboards that visualize metrics and logs, providing insights into the system's state at a glance. All of these are going to give you more information about how your cluster is doing in terms of health, how many more worker nodes you may need, and then how much it's actually being used by your users. Security considerations. So network policies, you're going to define and enforce network policies that restrict communication between pods and clusters to only necessary interactions, minimizing the risk of lateral movement in case of a security breach. Not every cluster needs to have access to every other cluster. Like your users may not need access to anything outside of their virtual cluster. Like they may just be deploying an application and then testing it out. They're not going to need access to someone else's virtual cluster. So it's better to just go ahead and lock things down by default and then open it up as needed when needed. Secrets management. Again, you're going to use tools like Vault to manage and rotate secrets securely, ensuring that sensitive information is protected. And then you're also going to have compliance audits. Regularly perform security audits and compliance checks to ensure that the virtual clusters meet organizational and regulatory standards. If you need to worry about compliance stuff, you're going to make sure that someone comes in and audits things. And then what you can do is iterate on that and then update and change your network policies, secret management, and other things to make sure that it's more locked down. Maybe you can define where images are allowed to be pulled from, so you're not just pulling random images too. Stuff like that. And then best practices for maintenance and upgrades. Make sure you're doing regular updates, right? Schedule regular updates for vCluster, Kubernetes, and all integrated tools to keep the environment secure and efficient. You want to make sure that those images are updated. You want to make sure that the Kubernetes version is updated, right? Like you're not falling behind and using a version that's not supported anymore, but also you want to do testing while you're doing these updates, right? So that's what vCluster is great for. Test a new version of Kubernetes on vCluster, make sure your applications and everything are working, and then go in and update the version of Kubernetes. Backup and disaster recovery. So you want to implement robust backup procedure and disaster recovery plans to ensure quick restoration in the event of data loss or catastrophic failure. This is common stuff when you're doing it yourself, or you're going to kind of rely on maybe the provider for stuff like this if they have options. So performance tuning. You want to continuously evaluate the performance of virtual clusters and tune configurations to optimize resource usage and application responsiveness. All right, so conclusion, right? This is a quick covering of the 2 chapters, 5 and 6. Like I said, you can go download the ebook if you need to. We're going to have one more video after this covering the last 2 chapters, and then we're going to wrap it up, and then I should be able to make a full-length video of everything if you just want to watch through from start to finish. But the conclusion is empowering developers with vCluster and integrated tools like Argo CD, Vault, Terraform not only enhances their productivity, but also drives innovation within the organization. Mastering these advanced management practices ensures that virtual Kubernetes clusters continue to provide a scalable, secure, and resilient environment for development teams. And then the next video we're going to cover is some real world use cases of vCluster, and then the future of Kubernetes virtualization and vClusters. I hope this video was helpful. If you want to see something different, let me know in the comments. This is just kind of covering what the ebook has for information about vCluster and building IDPs. If you want to see something else about vCluster, let us know. Join our Slack if you want to ask a question about vCluster. And then what you can do is reach out to me if you have any questions or if you have any suggestions for videos. Just let me know. I'm Mike Peterson on our Loft user Slack. But thanks for your time. Thanks for watching this video. And like I said, we've got one more video coming up for this ebook series. Check it out. It should be out next week. And then see you then.